Today's class, today's Mashir, is sponsored by Annie and Paul Foreman. To commemorate the yahrzeit of Annie's father, Dov and Shaul. When's the actual yahrzeit? You know when's the actual yahrzeit? When was the actual yahrzeit? Friday. So in the Shem Shav and Aliyah, we do thank you for the sponsorship and for involvement. So that's that. Ready everything, Josh? We're good? Okay. Parshas Vayishlach, page 170. You know, we study Chumash. We've been doing it for some time. Right? You open up Chumash, you hear some lectures, some talks, some board, some insight. So, obviously there are going to be different styles, different approaches. Over the years you've heard all kinds of different insight lectures, talks, or if there's commentators that you turn to, there's a great variety. What I believe is that the general approach is, or at least should be, is that, number one, when you open the Chumash, you're going to study the events or the Parshiyot that are prior to the mitzvot, very, very different than you're going to be analyzing the sections of Torah that deal with law. In other words, there is no question that if we're going to be opening now a Chumash Vayikra, and we're going to open up Parshas Shmini, and we're going to be discussing the kosher species, so the angle of our study will be very, very different, because there's something practical that we are trying to figure out. When you are dealing with sections, with portions that are not sharing with us mitzvot, you might find one there, right? You might find the fact that we don't eat the sciatica nerve in this week's portion, but obviously that's not the main theme, the main focus of the parsha. So what are you trying to achieve? And especially in Bereshit, when you have so many of those stories about the patriarchs and the matriarchs and the fighting, what exactly are you trying to walk away with? So there are fundamentals that we have to walk in with to be able to walk out with some kind of values. So the fundamentals are, number one, we are dealing with people. The matriarchs, the patriarchs, they were actually human beings. They were people. Now, they were very significant people, and to prove it to you, that when every single day we start our prayers, Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. So they are obviously far more significant. Now, we have to be very careful not to become Christian, or even more so, we have to be careful not to become Catholic and start making them godlike, but rather what we are trying to do is to learn from them, number one. Number two, recognize that these are people that are very mindful of God's existence, and everything they do is with an awareness that there is a God, and it's a gift from God to live, and all these concepts which we are familiar with. And perhaps if we have a successful day, we are mindful of these concepts, at least when we are saying a few words of our prayers, or at times if we are meditating and we think about creation and we think about the world. But to say that we are able to do it every single minute of the day, obviously is a great achievement. These are individuals that are able to do so. They are mindful of existence. Now, in this day and age, after the Torah was given, we could be mindful with the study of words of Torah. In other words, if someone is trying to figure out the proper way of heating food on Shabbat and serving a hot meal on Shabbos day, so you want to study those laws. So those laws, even though at the moment you are studying those laws, you are not thinking about God, but since you are doing it because you want to perform your tradition appropriately, so the study of those words become the Word of God, and it is a way of connecting to God Almighty. That's the system that works after these laws are given. Prior to the fact that those laws are given, we do find rabbinic sources that indicate that Avraham Avinu somehow was able to sense which mitzvot to perform or how to perform them, but clearly this is not the meat of their spiritual existence. but rather they study perhaps the Noahide laws, perhaps philosophy, perhaps existence, perhaps the gifts of God, studying nature, because when you study and appreciate nature to the best of your ability, and you recognize the wisdom of God, that too is a tool of connecting to God. So this is how we have to understand them. Very, very spiritual people, by the fact that they are mindful of what existence is about. Now, there are commentators that feel comfortable in pinpointing and analyzing mistakes of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And we go ahead and we place the magnifying glass on those mistakes because we believe that if they are presented, it is for us to learn something from it. So those are the general rules, and if I would want to give an introduction to the study of Chumash, that would be chapter 1. Chapter 2 is what the Ramban, Nachmanides, so we're dealing with the 13th century, an authority from Spain, leaves Spain, makes his way to the land of Israel in 1267, comes to Yerushalayim, finds only 2 Jews, wants to go ahead and establish a home there and a synagogue there, walks into a dilapidated structure and just removes some rubble and it's his, so he should have bought real estate then obviously in Yerushalayim in 1267. So the Ramban goes ahead and, I'm going to use the word introduces, but it is based on earlier sources, that you could look at the events that are described in Bereshit, what the Avot are doing, what the Imaot are doing, and you could go ahead and see it as them establishing a pattern for future generations. They do it. It is really telling us that that is going to occur in the future as well. Maaseh Avot, Siman Levanim. Fine. So therefore, Avram Avinu makes his way down to Egypt. His children are going to make his way down to Egypt. And there's a long list of such events that are described in the text. And the Ramban tells us, Maaseh Avot Siman Levanim. Fine. Now, then, my late father actually would often, and this was what he would argue and what he would present, is as follows. Is that you are dealing here with spiritual people. You are dealing with people that communicate with God, and they have a prophecy. Sometimes it is prophecy that is clear to them. Other times, they sense that this is something that I should do. And what my father would argue is that there were times that the patriarchs or the matriarchs would perform an act with the intention that it could be done again or it should have an impact on the future. Meaning, not just that things that happen to occur to them is going to be establishing a pattern, but they mindfully, with kavanah, with intention, perform specific acts with a desire that it should have an impact on the future generation. And so my father would claim that the idea of Avraham Avinu wanting to walk out of Egypt with wealth, beginning of Parashat Lech Lecha, he had a desire that gifts should be given and he should make his way out of Egypt with wealth, was because he has a desire, he wants to establish a pattern that when his descendants make their way to Egypt, they walk out with wealth. They should not walk out as slaves with nothing, but rather walk out with dignity due to their wealth. This is an approach my father took. And in the beginning of this week's Parsha, he comes up with another such explanation, and that's what I'm going to present to you, at least in the beginning of this class. Now, when our nation was exiled into Babylonia, after the destruction of the first temple, so the prophets warned us. One of the prophets that did a lot of warning, and there was a lot of ignoring of his words, was of course the prophet Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah. So it seems to be that the name indicates that what? That what dire warnings and people ignore. That's what it seems to be. What a wonderful name. Now, so the prophet Yirmiyah warns them, they ignore, they make their way to Babylonia. There is a massive crisis that the people of Israel are going through, because this is the first time that as a nation They are away from their homeland. They're without a temple. And things basically do fall apart. There are some significant problems that we have, but within a short period of time, and it is short enough that you still have people from the old generation there to preserve, because I don't think we would have lasted more than 70 years. They make their way back to the land of Israel, and they have the second commonwealth of Binyan, Beit Shani, the second Bet HaMikdash. Now, they are there, the second Bet HaMikdash, at least in rabbinic tradition, stands for 420 years. Right? Historians extend it, not that it's significant, but it is an interesting time. Because every Jew in Babylonia knew, every Jew, after the destruction of the first temple, and they still hear the words of the prophets, and the prophets talk to them about a messianic era, that there's going to be a return to the land of Israel. And Israel is going to regain its dignity, its independence, and it's going to have an impact on the world, and there's going to be peace, and the Jews are going to make their way back. These were concepts that they believed in. And they were waiting for it because they heard the words of the prophets from Zechariah to Yecheskel. They've heard these words. They come back to Israel to construct the second temple. This second temple is a smaller temple. The amount of people that return, some 40,000 people return. Most people, earlier on, stayed back in Babylonia. And at the same time that they return to the land of Israel, there are people that are in Egypt. There's a large Jewish community in Egypt. There's a large Jewish community in Yemen, in Taiman. So these are times that people struggled with the issue, what is our status in the land of Israel? In other words, we understand that eventually there's supposed to be this complete redemption. So this doesn't seem like a complete redemption. But on the other hand, we are in the land of Israel. We are in our homeland. We do have a temple. So what's our status? And they ask Zechariah, for example, they ask the halachic shaila. We know that when you are in exile, there are days we mourn for the fact that we lost our temple and our independence. We have the fast days. Should we continue fasting? Wondered the Jews who returned to the land of Israel. What's our status? It was a big question mark. So it was an odd period of time. Second temple period of time is one that we are familiar with from our tradition, from historical sources, obviously archaeological sources. But it is an odd time where there is a return to the land of Israel. Perhaps it had the potential of becoming this complete, this ideal, this messianic return. But at the same time, they sensed very well that this is not the real thing. They were dealing with the Persians, and then they're dealing with the Greeks, and then they're dealing with the Romans. And they have internal issues, that they are very far from a messianic era. Lots of problems. But on the other hand, they are in the land of Israel. This odd period of time known as the Second Temple period is something that we obviously are familiar with and we study. Now, it seems, and this is going to be, when we're going to look at Parshas Vayishlach, what I'm going to want to do is point out seven events that are described in this week's portion, where Yaakov Avinu makes his way back to Israel with his children. He has a family. He's in the land of Israel. Where Yaakov Avinu is hoping that this is that final return, that exile which was predicted, exile that his grandfather was warned that is going to occur. He hoped that that is part of the past, since he spent those challenging days up in Haran. He was hoping that this is going to be the final return. But we know very well that that's not the case, because this existence in Israel that is occurring in Parashat Vayishlach and Parashat Vayishev, this existence in Israel, unfortunately comes to an end with the real exile in Egypt. So this is this interesting period of time that it is, they are in Israel, but they're not really there with this permanent existence. It is something in the middle. So therefore you could argue that if indeed we accept this concept of patterns, and we are establishing here a pattern for the future as well, Parashat Vayishlach is establishing, and there will be references to the Second Temple period, where they're back home, but they're going to have to eventually leave. And I'm going to try to point out seven events described in this week's portion that seem perhaps to link to this idea. So now, number one, let's talk a little bit about dogs. Some people, dogs serve a purpose. There is no question. I understand when we were talking earlier about our trip to Italy, which is happening in its different form, that one of them was truffle. Truffle hunt. A truffle hunt. How do you go for a truffle? So we go to chocolate charm, but there they have to, or chocolate mousse. But what do? They take a dog. And what dogs are good at? A beagle, a dog that could sniff, and they go ahead and they look for these truffles. So dogs do, because you wouldn't have expensive truffles in expensive restaurants without the dog. But there are many, many purposes in dogs. What our rabbis tell us, based on a verse in Mishlei, is that something you shouldn't do to a dog is pull its ears. Okay? So that's number one thing we learn. Don't pull a dog's ears. But however, the rabbis are presenting it more as a metaphor for something else. And the rabbis, this is a verse in Mishlei. And the verse goes, Machazik be'oznei kalev over. The dog's passing. He's not bothering you. And you are afraid of dogs, and you go ahead and decide to pull the dog's ear, you could compare such foolish behavior to a mitaber al riv lolo, to someone that gets involved in a fight that's not his. If there is a fight and no one's bothering you, du mishzach nicht, right? The Jewish mother would say, you don't mix in, you keep out. So don't pull the dog's ear. Fine. Now, the rabbis take this verse in the Midrash, and they tell us that guess who ignored these words of wisdom? Yaakov. Yaakov ignored these words of wisdom? So the rabbis say yes. Because, yes, he had a brother who was fuming at him. He had a brother by the name of Esav that some 22 years or maybe 36 years earlier he got into a fight with by Yaakov stealing the blessings from Esav. So now Yaakov, years later, is making his way back. What does he do? He begins this communication with him. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav. He sends these angels ahead of him. To Esav, to the land of Seir. Esav is not even in Israel. He's in Seir, on the other side of the Jordan. Vaitzavotam le'emor, and he begins off with commanding them, this is what you should tell him, this is what you should offer him. Esav was not bothering him, the rabbis note. Esav was minding his own business. Goes Yaakov Avinu, what does he do? He starts reminding him of the whole thing. Aha, you remind the dog, you pull the dog's ears, you're going to have to deal with the dog. This is what we are being told. Now, in the words of the Midrash, Ledarko hayam me'alech. You know, Esav was involved in his own business. What are you doing, Mishra? Why are you bothering him? Fine. This is what the Midrash says. Comes the Ramban, comes Nachmanides, and he says you should know that there was a pattern established by Yaakov's behavior for events in the future as well, where again we made the same mistake. Ramban was of the opinion, and these are harsh words, so I'll read it in the Ramban's words. What happened was we had this incredible victory by the Hashmonaim. The Greek Empire falling in the hands of a few rebels. It is indeed an incredible event. Historians, our tradition, and it's something we celebrate on Hanukkah. Right? That a few Kohanim have the ability to overthrow a superpower. But what happens right after that? What happens is that Yehuda Maccabi understands that suddenly I'm no longer a rebel, right? I am suddenly a politician as well. I'm a king, right? There's this transfer here, right? From, I'm not going to say Chas v'Shalom, I'm not going to compare him to a fellow who has a show on NBC to becoming a president, right? But the idea that you have to transfer, you have to start working in this new realm, knowing as leadership. So he is seeking alliances. That's what you do. It's all about alliances. Everything's about an alliance. So now he knows that he just dealt with the Greeks. He is afraid that the Greeks are going to go ahead and return, so he needs an alliance with the enemy of the Greeks. My enemy's enemy is my friend. So what does he do? It's described in the book of Chashmenaim that Yehuda chooses two individuals. One of them is Aopalimus, one of them is Yeshua ben Elazar, and we are told that Yehuda, as he takes control, he sends them Vayishalchem leRoma, lehakim brit ahava v'shalom itam. He sends them to Rome. And his desire is to have a pact and an alliance with the Romans. He invites the Romans in. He invites the Romans in, but once they have a stakehold, once they have a presence in Israel, we paid a price. Says the Ramban, this pattern of inviting a party that should have been ignored was done by Yaakov, and unfortunately it establishes a pattern for the future as well in the Second Temple period. Okay, this is what Ramban tells us. So you see again, a pattern indeed. Comes my father, and my father says that you should know that perhaps Yaakov senses that there is a need to do it. And it works as follows. To walk into your own home and to ask permission from others to enter is obviously absurd. Right? Now, you come back from an extended vacation. You had a nice neighbor who took care of your house, right? So and then you call before you arrive. You send the neighbor a text. Is it okay if I come home? Now it's okay to tell them you're coming back. That they should not call the police when they see activity, right? So in 3 weeks when you come home, it is okay to inform them. However, to ask them permission is obviously absurd. Now, Israel is the homeland of the people of Israel. It's our home. It's always been our home. We've never lost that connection. Not one day over the past 2,000 years have we not missed a day where we mention it's our home. However, Israel is a unique home. Due to the fact that it is the palace of the Creator, there is an expectation that we are on a specific spiritual level before we make our way into that home. Fine. So now, Yaakov Avinu senses at some level that Jews eventually are going to be out of home and are going to want to return. If we are only going to have access to this home when we are on the right spiritual level, we might in the future not be able to return because the Jews do fall. Yaakov wants to establish that the Jewish people have two ways of entering their home. One is if they are indeed on the right spiritual level. Option number two is by being granted permission by the nations. Again, even if we are not on that high spiritual level, even if we are not on the level that we are all committed to the complete values of Torah and mindfulness and kindness and righteousness and commitments to Torah mitzvos, even if we are not on that level, which on the surface would not grant us access, because that's the key to enter into the palace of the king, to follow the rules and regulations and the guidelines established by the king and the kingdom, even if we don't have the key, there is plan B. You can enter the land of Israel, even if you are not on the highest of levels, if the nations of the world grant you permission. Now, what my father was trying to do is trying to justify what Yaakov is doing. Meaning, he obviously was on the right level to enter. But he is trying to establish a pattern that in future generations, his descendants can make their way home, even if they are not completely worthy, even if they don't have that spiritual level that is required. Now, obviously, this is establishing a pattern because the second Bet HaMikdash, when are they given the green light to return home? Not by God, really, but rather by Cyrus, by Koresh. Koresh says, you know what? We even called him a Mashiach in our tradition. Koresh says, make your way to the land of Israel. The Jews, they were not on the highest of levels. They had intermarriage problems. There were some significant issues there. They weren't very knowledgeable of our tradition. But you can make your way home, even if you are not on the highest of levels, if the nations of the world give you the green light, established by Yaakov, and he senses it, and that's why he gets involved with Esav. And obviously, look in the 20th century, right? The nation, our nation, were we on that right level? I don't know. Were we granted permission? Yes, we had the Balfour and the conference in San Remo. The nations of the world, the League of Nations, give a green light to the Jewish people, a homeland for the people of Israel. Now, God gave us that short little window of the world allowing it, and then obviously the window closes, and we have the 20th century and all its history. But the reality is that we made our way into the land of Israel with permission of the nations. So this is a way of understanding Yaakov's Avinu and somehow perhaps even defending him from what Ramban and Midrash seem to find as a problem. So that is we got 1 out of 7. Okay? Are you ready? So let's continue. Let's go for number 2. Now, when Yaakov Avinu realizes that his brother is not coming with roses but with guns, so what does he do? So on page 172, first verse there, which is verse 8, so there's a military preparation here. Vayira Yaakov me'od, he became very frightened. Vayatzer lo, and this is something that distressed him. So what does he do? Vayachatz et ha'am ito v'et hatzon v'et habakar. He goes ahead and he separates his camp into 2 camps. And what does he say in verse 9? If indeed Esav comes to one of the camps and strikes it, the remaining camp shall survive. The nation of Israel, to survive, feels Yaakov, you have to have them in 2 separate locations. Good idea in investments as well, by the way. Never put all your money, all your eggs don't go in one basket. All your money doesn't go into one stock, right? Don't do that. Diversify is a halacha, because it says it in the Talmud, believe it or not. If you want to know how to diverse, it's interesting that Talmud says you're supposed to divide it into 3 parts. A third in real estate, a third in commerce, a third in cash, right? And then I was reading a book my older brother gave me about this wealthy German moneylender who happened not to be a Jew, by the name of Jacob Fugger, and he also made the same recommendation. So diversifying is important. But here what we are learning is the fact that for the survival of the people of Israel, you have to have them in 2 separate locations. Comes the Midrash and it notes that you should know that this indeed was the existence of the people of Israel during Second Temple period. First Temple period, we are all in our homeland. Excuse me. First Temple period, we are all together as a nation. Comes Second Temple period, there are people in Egypt. There are people obviously in Bavel. We talk about Hillel. We always talk about Hillel. You know where Hillel originated from? Our great Hillel with all the stories. Hillel ha-Bavli. He was a Babylonian actually. So the nation itself is divided into 2. This is what's occurring during the Second Temple period, and that's how we survive. The Midrash tells us that im yavo esav el hamachaneh achat veikau, elu achenu shebadarom. Those are the people in the south. That if they are attacked, there will be those who survive. Those are the people who are in the Gola in Babylonia. I believe this is a statement that was said during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, when there was a brutal attack by the Romans, the same Romans invited in by Yehuda. So the nation was concerned that we're not going to survive, there are not going to be Jewish people in the future. Well, there is a guarantee because we follow the system of diversifying our nation. So that's number 2, by the way. So now, number 1 we had was inviting Esav in. Number 2, the fact that during Second Temple period, the nation is settled in not 1, but 2 locations. Okay, things do work out with Esav, right? Eventually, we get the kisses and everything works. They live. But turn to page 178. Let's turn to page 178. And where does Yaakov go after the last line on page 178? That finally Esav goes to Seir. Esav goes to Seir. So now the question is, where does Yaakov go? What's the verse say? Sukkot. He makes his way to Sukkot. Very interesting. He goes to Seir, and he makes his way to Sukkot. Well, Sukkot is something that's very significant for us. So, when it comes to Hanukkah is an exciting time. There's no question about it. We are competing because we have to hear the jingles that are going meshuggah ready. Like sometimes you listen to the radio and you hear them with their Xmas songs and you start yelling at it. It's November, what's chutzpah? Wait, can't you wait at least? December we've accepted that this is the price of being in exile. But but this is Hanukkah somehow uplifts us. It's nice to have a late Hanukkah because we could pull through the whole December with our Yontif and mindful of the significance of the events. And we love talking about the Chanukiah and what it symbolizes. And we always mention the fact that there is a very old debate between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel about how to light your Hanukkah candles. While Hillel says it is on night 1-1, night 2-2, and you go up to 8, Shammai says, I've never seen a Shammai person doing it, but the Talmud shares with us that Shammai believes that there is supposed to decline. Decline, very un-Jewish if you think about it, right? Decline, like what? Like start off big and then go small, very difficult to understand. So comes the Talmud, and the Talmud tells us, you want to know why Shammai says that you're supposed to decline? Because they compare it to something that occurred in the temple. And that was that on the holiday of Sukkot, when they would bring these 70 bulls to pray for the welfare of humanity, was a very significant part of the sacrificial service of Sukkot. We are told, and we read this on every day of Sukkot, that on day 1 of Sukkot you bring 13 young bulls. And on day 2, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. If you do the math, you get yourself 70. A decline, say Shammai, aha. That is where we get our idea that there's supposed to be a decline. Right? Now, it obviously represents much more. But you should know that this idea of taking Hanukkah and relating it to Sukkot is not something that the Talmud came up with or Shammai came up with. But rather, there is a text known as the Book of the Maccabim. There are 2 of them, 2 versions. And we are told that when they arrived on Hanukkah, and they go ahead and they rededicate the temple, and they purify it. So the verse tells us that they celebrate to God for 8 days. Why did they celebrate for 8 days when indeed on the 25th of Kislev, they rededicate and purify the temple? So the text tells us that they celebrate. You have to remember, this is not canonized text. Right? We don't have a Kriyasa, we don't have a Megillah reading, but it's nevertheless text from that period, and there are things that we could learn from it. But we are told, Vayachogu laHashem shmonat yamim ki yemei Chag HaSukkot. This is text that appears in the book of the Maccabim, that when they celebrated Hanukkah, they chose, it seems to be at least 8 days, because of the holiday of Sukkot. And the verse shares with us that they remembered the days when they were hiding in caves, and they were walking around like animals, not knowing if they're going to survive. And they remembered that they were going through that difficult period a few weeks ago on Sukkot. You know what life is about if it's a successful one. Appreciation, that you look back, right? You look back at circumstances that you had in the past, and you compare it to the blessings you have now, and you say, this is wonderful, right? That's what Jewish identity is really about. Lehodot, to be thankful. Well, they experienced that because when they were celebrating Hanukkah, they looked back to what occurred only a few weeks earlier when they were celebrating Sukkot. And that Sukkot was an awful Sukkot because they were hiding in caves and they did not know if they're going to have enough to feed themselves and their family. And now they came to Yerushalayim and they regained independence. They regained their spiritual hub. They have control over the temple. So they were thankful because they compared it to Sukkot and they decided to make Chanukah like Sukkot and celebrate for 8 days. This is what we are told. So now you understand that there is, when Shammai tells us, well, Chanukah, the reason we're going to work with the system of a decline is because we want to compare it to Sukkot. This is not random. That became their Sukkot, which is obviously a holiday for 8 days. So here we have it. So therefore, if you want to go ahead and find another reference to the holiday that symbolizes the Second Temple period, the Bet HaMikdash HaShani, I would argue that it is Sukkot, And therefore we have here, this is the third, we have here what? They came to Sukkot and he made Sukkot. Fine? So we got 3. Okay, so we can move on to number 4. Welcome to an awful chapter, page 180, right? An awful chapter, a very painful one. And poor Yaakov settles in the land of Israel. This is what he has to deal with. And it is the story, the tragic story of Dinah's abduction. Now, the Rambam points out that you should know that Hanukkah is a time that we are thankful to God, not just because we had a spiritual redemption, that we could practice our faith as tradition teaches us, but physically as well. Because the Rambam tells us that the Greeks controlled our property, they took over our lives, and he adds, ubnotehem, they took our daughters. Right? The Greeks did whatever they wanted. Taking daughters was part of the tragedy of the events that led to the incredible events of Hanukkah. That's what Rambam tells us, based on many rabbinic sources. And if you want to find the source of coming home to Eretz Yisrael, Second Temple period, where the status is unclear, and a tragedy that is similar to that tragedy, obviously we have the story of Dinah, where the daughter of Yaakov Avinu is taken. So the fourth one is short, so you don't have to worry. So you got the fourth one? The relationship is the taking of the daughters that was performed by the Greeks, and it is done by Shechem. Now, they negotiate, you know the story with Hamor and Shechem. They take the daughter, the children of Yaakov negotiate and say, you want to be, you want our daughter? No problem. We're asking you for one thing. And Hamor and Shechem say, okay, what could one thing be already that's so crazy? Tell us what you want us to do. And they say, Bris Milah. And you can imagine them a bit surprised, because that's not exactly what they expected. But nevertheless, they bought into it. They went through the surgery, and they are in recovery. And who shows up? Shimon and Levi, 2 of the sons. They wipe out the city, and they take their sister. Yaakov says to them, that this is problematic, your behavior here. I don't have too many alliances. I'm going to be wiped off. And they say, well, they're not going to make our sister like an harlot. We felt we had to do it. They don't look into the circumstances. They don't look at the results. They act. They are zealots. That's what Shimon and Levi are all about. Now, zealots are incredible people. They are either the most inspiring people, or the people that are the biggest pain and destructive force that we have to deal with as Jews. In other words, if you envision a chassid, right, payas and a beard and running, right? It could be, and I've seen both, it could be the most inspiring individual. You see someone fainted, and there was a chassid that had a background or perhaps some training in Magen David Adom in Israel or in Zaka, and the passion the man ran to go ahead and save a life was incredible. The passion you see when they do acts of chesed, right? What unimaginable. These are people that are complete zealots, and it could be in spiritual matters as well. Sometimes you have educators that teach kids with such passion. They are the ones that are keeping our nation alive. Those are the zealots when it's used correctly. The zealot could be a very dangerous person, because the zealot could go ahead and start throwing stones at a car because it's violating the Shabbos, and the media is there, and he's going to act like a complete mishuganeh, and that is the image that secular Israelis have. The zealot could be the one that builds the world, or it could be the one that destroys the world. And what we are being told here is that Shimon and Levi act together as zealots, but they take different paths afterwards. When Levi, the Levim, they use their passion to inspire, to teach, to get the people of Israel on the proper track. They use it for that. That is proper usage. And Shimon, on the other hand, if you look at the story in the wilderness, it is his tribe who use their passion to rebel against Moshe and to do what they want. That is unfortunately the downfall of the zealot. And if you want to understand the Second Temple period, you have to analyze the zealot. The zealot brought about salvation. Hanukkah is about the person who doesn't look at the facts, believe it or not. In other words, if you would have the Hashmonaim looking at maps of where and the size of what they are going to confront with the Greek military, and would compare what they have, right? They are fighting cannons with bows and arrows, basically. And if they would look at this, at statistics and numbers and speak to experts, there would have been no Hanukkah, there would have been no future to the people of Israel. But the Levim, the Kohanim, who are descendants of the Levim, they don't look at numbers. There's something to do. We have a responsibility. There is a mission for the sake of God. Who cares? We have a mission. That's Hanukkah. That's Jewish survival, by the way. We are against the odds. On the other hand, when it is misused, you have the zealots of the end of the Second Temple period who brought about, according to the rabbis, the destruction. When there was a sense that, you know what, we could deal with Rome. We have to become subservient to them in essence. We have to go ahead and accept their terms because we're not going to survive, right? And they were supposed to negotiate with Rome at that point because by not doing so, it brought about the destruction. Who led to it? The Zealots, if you read that period. The Zealots really symbolize Second Temple period. And this is what is introduced in this week's portion. So we have here also the Zealots. No question about that. So that was number 5. During second, you're getting, well, people are getting a little bit nervous here. Like, no, not nervous. Some people are, and some people are not. Oh.
Some can't count.
What was that?
Some can't count.
Some can't count. So now, you know that during the Second Temple period, they had the Kuthians. You ever hear about them? They come from Kuta. They come from Kuta. They come to the land of Israel. They realize that they're dealing with wild beasts. They decide, you know what? If you want to survive in Israel, you got to learn the God of Israel. So they convert to Judaism, but their conversion was very questionable because it always seemed to many rabbis that their conversion was not completely for the sake of heaven, and rather they retained a link to their old pagan gods. And the rabbis dealt with these Kuthians for hundreds of years. There was always a question about their status. The problem was a conversion that was done not for the right reason. Now, eventually the rabbis tell us that things worked out because they found, eventually, in Har Gerizim, they found an image. They had an image that identified, for the rabbis at least with clarity, that they're not really detached from their own tradition, and the Kuthians therefore never converted because they always, they were, it's very easy to accept more than one God, right? The day is long, one morning, one God. And so they did indeed bring the God of Israel into the picture, but they did not commit to him completely. So when you talk about a conversion that is not for the sake of heaven, let's look what happened with Hamor, Shechem. Did they convert? I mean, they did have that bris milah. Was it for the right reason? Right? Did they really, really convert to the values of Yaakov? Obviously not. So this again is establishing a pattern for the Second Temple period of very problematic conversions. This is what we are dealing with now. The last one is the fact that there is a description of Atamat Dvorah, that Devorah dies. Who was Devorah? She was the wet nurse of Rivka. Devorah relates to Dibur. The word of God died during the Second Temple period. They no longer heard the word of God. So that's the 7th one. But just to sum up one thing that's important, if you want I could afterwards give you more details. But the Second Temple period was a mess. A lot of problems. But nevertheless, we celebrate the fact, come Hanukkah, we celebrate, the Rambam tells us, that for 200 years we regained control of our homeland. So we celebrate it. And it is to teach us that even if things are not perfect, we are thankful to God when we have a homeland and there's Jewish sovereignty. It is something to be grateful for. This is what we learn from Hanukkah. And I have no doubt in my mind that the past 68 years of the Jewish state, right, things are not perfect in Israel, right? They're good, they're not perfect. And I believe that with all the problems that exist, it is better than many, many years of the Second Temple period. Far better than many of the years of the Second Temple period. And if tradition teaches us that we have to be grateful to God Almighty for those 200 years that we regained control due to the fact that we had the Maccabees and their miracles that occurred, so I think we have to be grateful to the Almighty for the fact that we have a Jewish state right? With all its problems, and obviously we have a responsibility to roll up our sleeves and kick in and help in any way, shape, or form to enhance it, but nevertheless, to be thankful to the Rabbanu Shalom is part of our tradition indeed. Thank you for listening, everyone, and have a wonderful day. We'll see you next week, Bezrat Hashem.